Section 1. The Cradle opens. Year 72,118. Ver Rift Observatory, Dawn Trim. The twin suns had barely cleared the canyon rim when Lena Voss cut the Preservari probe in half. 6 months of delicate, reverent work had led to this moment. A single, brutal stroke of the plasma lance that turned 4 billion years of alien engineering into 2 smoking hemispheres. The observatory's stone floor trembled with the dying scream of the lance. Grease and ozone and something older than language hung in the air. Lena stood in the center of the containment ring, 29 winters old, coveralls scorched in a dozen places, dark hair tied back with a strip torn from an old reactor rag. Her hands did not shake. They had stopped shaking the day the canyon wind landed with its impossible cargo. 6 months of sleepless nights, of arguing with guild masters who wanted the teardrop locked away forever, of promising she could open it without destroying what might be the last gift the Preservari ever gave. Now the gift lay open. The lower hemisphere rested on the iridium cradle like a black bowl full of starlight. Inside, suspended on nothing visible, a crystal memory core the size of a heart spun slowly, throwing off spirals of blue-white light that resolved into a perfect double helix. Human DNA, but subtly, achingly different. Numbers cascaded across the holoscreens lining the observatory wall. Match confidence 99.41%. Divergence 73,997 years. Lena's breath caught hard enough to hurt. 74,000 years ago, the Preservari had taken 300 terrified hunters from the steppe. 73,997 years ago, the Toba caldera had roared and covered the world in winter. The math was merciless. The cousins left behind had lived. She stepped closer. The core pulsed once, as though aware of her heartbeat. A single line of text unfolded in the air above it, written in the oldest dialect of the steppe, and then politely, in modern Cryonixian. They lived. Lena's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the cradle, fingers smearing grease across obsidian that had never known a human hand until today. The words blurred. She was not crying, she had forgotten how, but her throat worked as if she were. Behind her, the observatory doors slammed open. Cold dawn air rolled in, carrying the smell of hot iron and canyon dust. Footsteps, too many, echoed off the vaulted stone. She did not turn. She could not. Lena. The voice belonged to Master Historian Jackson Holt, usually calm as bedrock, now cracked with something raw. Tell me you didn't break it. She laughed once, a sound like breaking glass. I opened it, Jackson, that's all. Silence. Then the soft intake of 40 breaths as the council saw what she saw. The helix brightened, impatient. A new image blossomed above the cradle. Earth, as the Preservari had last seen it 74,000 years ago. Blue oceans, green continents, the faint glow of campfires along the great rivers. Then the image jumped forward in stuttering centuries. Ice retreating, rivers of people spreading, cities rising like crystal growth, until the night side blazed with electric fire, and the moon wore human footprints. A final frame locked in place. Earth today, seen from high orbit, whole and alive and waiting. Someone behind Lena began the 3-note phrase, barely audible. Others joined until the observatory itself seemed to hum. Lena lifted her right hand, still stained with cutting plasma residue, and touched the projection. The Earth image rippled like water, then dissolved into drifting letters that spelled the same message in every human language cryonics had ever known. They lived. She found her voice, small and steady and shaking all at once. Record this, she said to the empty air, knowing every recorder in the room was already running. Observation date, year 72,118, day 187, dawn cycle. Subject, Preservari memory core recovered from Oort intercept. Conclusion. She had to stop, swallow, start again. Conclusion. The cousins endured. Toba did not end them. The spark was never ours alone. The helix pulsed once more, brighter, and a final line appeared beneath the others. Simple, terrible, inevitable. Your debt remains. Lena stared at it until the words burned behind her eyes, the way Asha's visions once burned behind hers 74,000 years ago. Then she reached out, closed her grease-black hand around the still-warm memory core, and pulled it free of its cradle of light. The observatory lights flickered as every screen in Ver Rift went white for one heartbeat. When vision returned, Lena Voss stood alone in the center of the ring, holding the heart of a message older than civilization. The council watched her the way the first 300 had once watched Asha drive the ivory tablet into alien soil. She lifted the crystal high so both rising suns struck it and turned the double helix into living fire. "They lived," she said, and her voice carried to the rim of the canyon and beyond. "Now we go home." Section 2, The Chamber of Continuance. Year 72,118, Hearthspire, local noon. The Chamber of Continuance had not been opened in 11,000 years. Carved into the living heart of Hearthspire's tallest spire, its walls were black glass veined with iridium, the floor, a single slab of polished canyon stone, worn into shallow bowls by generations of kneeling pilgrims. In the center stood the original ivory tablet, bolted to a plinth of reactor-forged crystal and lit from beneath, so the blood grooves glowed like molten copper. Every child knew its shape before they knew letters. Today the chamber doors, 3 meters thick, sealed since the century of storms, groaned open for the first time since the last planetary war. Cale Drace walked first. 62 winters had put silver in his hair and reactor scars across his forearms, but he moved like a man who still expected the sky to fall on him. Behind him came the 8 guildmasters in order of precedence: Reactor, Forge, Flight, Archive, Agri, Med, Stone, and Memory. Their robes were plain work cloth, not ceremony. No one had time for pageantry when the universe had just handed them a bill 74,000 years overdue. Lena Voss followed last, cradling the Preservari memory core against her chest like an infant. The twin suns, high and merciless, struck the spire's crystal crown and poured white fire down the shaft so that every face looked carved from bone. They formed a circle around the tablet. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind moving across the open roof 1,100 meters above, carrying the smell of hot stone and distant rain. Cale broke the silence first. "Read it again, Jackson." Jackson Holt, 48, salt and pepper beard trimmed short for the first time in years, unrolled the flexible sheet he had carried from the observatory. His voice, trained for funeral cadence, filled the chamber without effort. Match confidence, 99.41%. Genetic divergence, 73,997 years. Toba catastrophic eruption confirmed. Global human population bottleneck reduced to approximately 1,000 breeding pairs. Extinction averted. Current Earth population estimate, 8.3 billion souls. Final line, repeated in every recorded human language, they lived. He let the sheet roll itself shut. The snap echoed like a bone breaking. Cale's eyes never left the ivory tablet. He spoke the carved words aloud, the way every child did when they first learned to read. "We were taken. We endured. One day we will return and pay the debt." He turned to the circle. Today is that day. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue. Riley Quinn, 26, flight leathers still dusted with observatory grit, leaned against the wall as if gravity had personally offended him. He broke the silence with the grin that had talked him out of 3 court-martials. "So," he said, voice light, "road trip?" The laughter that answered was small, cracked, and utterly real. Cale waited for it to die. When the chamber was quiet again, he spoke with the same iron calm he had once used to order a failing reactor flooded with boron. "We build the biggest torch this world has ever lit," he said. "We fill it with everyone willing to leave grandchildren they will never meet, and we go home." Lena stepped forward, the memory core still glowing against her coveralls. "We have the spine already," she said. 3 kilometers of iridium lattice left over from the emissary follow-up that never launched. Reactors are mature. The Yellowstone cycle is stable. We can do it in 5 years if we stop pretending we have a choice. Guildmaster Forge, a woman whose arms could bend reactor plate bare-handed, nodded once. "My people will melt the canyon to give you metal." Guildmaster Flight, ancient and bird-thin, added, "My pilots will learn to fly it drunk, blind, and backwards if that's what it takes." One by one, the masters pledged forges, grain, seed, water, children, lives. The words were simple, almost brutal in their lack of ceremony. When the last voice fell silent, Cale knelt, not in reverence, but because his knees finally betrayed him, and pressed his scarred forehead to the ivory tablet. The stone was warm from the twin suns. "We're coming home," he whispered to 8 billion strangers who had never known they were missed. Above them, the wind shifted and carried the faint, distant sound of hammers already beginning to fall. Section 3. The skeleton rises. 4 months later, high orbit above cryonics. The Astralis grew like a living thing, and the planet itself seemed to bleed metal to feed it. 3 kilometers of spine, iridium lattice forged in the same Vale Rift crucibles that once armed fleets against the century of storms, hung in the dark between the twin suns, catching their bronze light and throwing it back in molten ribbons. Construction tugs, little more than torches with claws, danced along the skeleton in perfect silence, spitting white fire as they welded each new rib into place. Every weld flashed bright enough to cast shadows across half a continent below. Cale Drace drifted the length of the spine in an open-work pod, magnetic boots clanking against the lattice. His suit was old, patched with reactor tape, the visor scarred from too many micrometeorite kisses. At 62, he should have been planetside supervising from a warm office. Instead, he came up every week, because someone had to feel the ship grow under their hands. Riley Quinn's voice crackled in his helmet, lazy and delighted. 4% more thrust, old man. 4%. That's all I'm asking. You give me 4, I'll get us to Sol before your beard finishes going gray. Cale didn't answer immediately. He was watching a tug lay the final keel plate, 300 meters of mirror-bright iridium, etched with the names of every settlement that had given metal, grain, or children. The plate locked home with a vibration he felt through his boots and bones. 3%, he said at last. And you stop calling me old man. Deal. 3 it is. I'll still beat the schedule. Cale allowed himself half a smile inside the helmet. Riley was 26, born in the orbital flight school, raised on simulators in Canyon Wind. He treated 3 kilometers of Starship the way other people treated a fast skiff. Cale envied the certainty. He keyed the open channel so every tug, every welder, every soul listening from the surface could hear. "Mark this day," he said, voice rough from recycled suit air. "Spine complete, keel true. We have a ship." A cheer went up, raw static across 1,000 suit comms. Someone started the 3-note phrase. Within seconds, the entire construction fleet was singing it, voices overlapping in the vacuum because sound doesn't carry but hearts do. The twin suns caught the lattice and turned the whole skeleton into a burning ladder stretched across the sky. Below, on the Hearthspire Plateau, 800 million people looked up and saw their future blazing above them like a promise forged in fire. Cale killed his mag boots and let the pod drift free for a moment, tethered only by the thin umbilical. From here, the curve of cryonics filled his visor. Red deserts, green rift canyons, the white scars of ancient storms. A world that had never been meant for them, yet had kept them alive for 74,000 years. He touched the hull plate nearest his glove. It was warm from the suns, warm from the welders' torches, warm from the hands of every smith who had carried metal up from the canyons. "We're coming home," he told the ship quietly. "Hold together long enough to get us there." Riley's pod slid alongside, grinning face visible behind the gold visor. "Sentimental in vacuum, Commander. Careful, the cold will crack that heart right open." Cale reached out and thumped Riley's helmet hard enough to ring. "Shut up and help me name the torch chambers." Riley's grin widened. "Already did. Port is Asha, starboard is Lyra. Figured the women who started this get to light the way back." Cale looked at the glowing spine one more time, then nodded once. "Asha and Lyra it is." Far below, the twin suns slipped behind the planet's limb, and the skeleton of the Astralis hung alone in the dark, catching starlight on every weld and scar, waiting for the heart that would carry it across 2,520 light-years of night. Section 4. The Stasis Vote. 1 week to launch, Grand Amphitheater of Hearthspire. The riftstone terraces were never meant to hold 40,000 souls at once, yet 40,000 had come. They filled every ledge, every stair, every shadow carved by the twin suns since the first exiles learned to cut stone. Children sat on shoulders, elders leaned on canes forged from old torch struts. The air tasted of sweat, red dust, and the copper smell that always clung to reactor smiths after long shifts. No banners flew, no music played, only the low, constant thrum of the planet itself, as if cryonics held its breath. At the center of the natural bowl stood a simple circle of black glass, the same speaking stone Asha had once used to claim a new world. Upon it now waited Cale Drace, Lena Voss, and Tara Vex. Behind them, on a plinth of reactor crystal, rested the Preservari memory core, quiet for the first time since it had been opened, yet still glowing faintly, like a coal refusing to die. Lena spoke first, her voice amplified by nothing more than the perfect acoustics of the canyon, carried to the highest terrace without effort. "Mission profile," she said, and the words fell like hammer blows. "Total objective duration, 2,520 light-years to Sol. Awake time, less than 1 year, continuous for command crew, phase shifts for volunteers. Biological aging, 20 to 30 months subjective. Stasis for all non-essential personnel to preserve resources. Return flight, optional but probable within 5 years of arrival." She let that settle. A child somewhere high on the western wall began to cry. The sound was quickly hushed. Tara Vex stepped forward next, calm and precise as always. "Stasis is mature. We have run it on volunteers for decades. Survival rate, 99.97%. The 31 who did not wake were old, sick, or simply tired. Everyone here is none of those things." A rustle moved through the crowd. Half laughter, half sob. Cale did not step forward. He simply began to speak from where he stood, and 40,000 people leaned toward the sound the way flowers lean toward light. "I will not lie to you," he said. "We leave family behind. We cross a void that swallowed our probe whole. We may arrive to find the Preservari waiting, or worse, nothing at all. We may fail, and the debt remains unpaid. We may succeed, and 8 billion cousins will look at us like ghosts from a story they never believed." He paused. The wind took his words and carried them up the terraces like smoke. "But the memory core showed us lights on the night side of Earth. Cities brighter than our forges, a spark that endured without us, yet suffered a winter we can end. We go to return the favor. Fusion cores, mirror sails, seed vaults for a world choking on ash. The price is 1 year awake, and the certainty that every face you love waits here, while you chase a debt 74,000 years old." He looked slowly across the sea of faces, some proud, some terrified, some already weeping openly. "Vote yes, and we become the road home. Vote no, and we stay. Build mirrors for our own sky, grow old here, die with the debt on our shoulders." Silence. Then Riley Quinn, standing at the very back with his flight jacket slung over one shoulder, cupped his hands and shouted down the canyon, "Be reckless with me." The laughter that answered was huge and sudden and healing. Someone else took up the shout. Within heartbeats, the terraces thundered with it, 40,000 voices demanding to be spent like torch fuel. Cale waited until the sound crested and broke. When quiet returned, he raised one scarred hand. "Vote," he said simply. 40,000 right arms rose as one, some trembling, some steady, all unwavering. Lena felt the count through the stone under her boots before the numbers ever reached the screens. 92.4% yes. The canyon roared, not with joy, something deeper, older. The sound the first 300 had made when Asha drove the tablet into alien soil and claimed tomorrow with nothing but blood and words. Cale did not cheer. He only looked up at the sky where the Astralis already waited, half-finished and hungry, and spoke so softly only Lena and Tara heard him. "Forgive us, little fire," he whispered to the family he would leave. "We chose the road." High above, unseen, the Preservari observer that had released the memory core recorded the vote, and for the first time in 4 billion years felt something perilously close to anticipation. Section 5. Last night on cryonics, Drace Compound, Canyon Rim, final sunset. The smaller sun bled bronze across the red cliffs, while the larger one balanced on the horizon like a forge hammer about to fall. From the balcony of the old stone house, the entire Vare rift lay open below. Reactors glowing steady white, mirror arrays catching the last light, the skeletal Astralis high above everything, already catching starlight on its unfinished flanks. Cradle stood alone, flight coat unfastened, silver-streaked hair moving in the hot wind that always rose at dusk. In his hands he held the bone flute, simple, ancient, carved from the same mammoth tusk as the ivory tablet itself. It had been passed down through 62 generations of his line, and tomorrow it would leave cryonics forever. The screen door creaked, bare feet on stone. Cradle's Drace, 8 winters old, all knees and solemn eyes, padded across the balcony carrying a bundle wrapped in blue cloth. She stopped an arm's length away, exactly the way she had been taught when adults were thinking heavy thoughts. "Grandfather," she said, small voice steady, "you forgot this." She unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay the flute's twin, smaller, child-sized, carved only last year from canyon driftwood. Cradle had made it himself during the long nights when the ship took more sleep than it gave back. He knelt so their eyes were level. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair across her face. "I didn't forget," he said. "I left it for you." Cradle looked at the little flute, then at the ancient one in his hands, then back to his face. "You're really going," she whispered. "Not a question. I'm really going. Will you play it when you find them? The cousins? Every day." She bit her lip. 8 years old, and trying not to cry in front of the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through reactor glow so she could touch the stars. "Then take mine too," she said suddenly, thrusting the child-sized flute forward. "So they know we're still singing." Cradle took it carefully, as though it might shatter. The wood was still pale, smelling of resin and little girl hands. He slipped it inside his coat, next to his heart. "I will guard it with my life, little fire." Cradle studied him a moment longer, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. He held her until the smaller sun vanished and the wind cooled enough to raise gooseflesh on their arms. Later, when the house was dark and the family slept, the thin sleep of those who have already said goodbye, Cradle returned to the balcony alone. The Astralis was a hard line of light across half the sky now, construction torches still winking as the night shift welded dreams into metal. He lifted the bone flute, original blood-stained at one end from Asha's own thumb, and set it to his lips. 3 notes. Simple, perfect, older than language. They floated out over the canyon, carried on wind that had blown across 74,000 years of exile. Somewhere far below, a reactor smith heard and answered with 3 hammer strikes against an anvil. Another forge took it up, then another, until the entire rift echoed like a bell made of stone and fire. Cradle played it again, softer. The ship above answered with a single navigation strobe, white, 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 exactly on the beat. He tucked the flute away beside its smaller twin and spoke to the night, to the ship, to the 8 billion cousins waiting 2,520 light-years away. "We're coming home," he said. "Listen for the song." Behind him the house was quiet. Ahead, the torch chambers Asha and Lyra glowed dull red, warming for tomorrow's ignition. Cradle stayed on the balcony until the larger sun rose again and painted the canyon the color of fresh blood. And still he did not move. Some debts are too large to sleep beneath. Section 6. Ignition Day. Hearthspire Spacefield, pre-dawn. The plateau was a single heartbeat made of 40,000 bodies. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the cold dark, breath fogging in perfect unison, eyes fixed on the gantry where the Astralis crouched like a mountain forged from iridium and will. 3 kilometers of ship, belly glowing dull red from the reactors already spooling, torch chambers Asha and Lyra purring at idle. The twin suns had not yet risen. Only starlight and reactor glow lit the scene, turning every face bronze and shadow. 40,000 had volunteered. 41 would ride awake. The rest slept in the ship's belly, cocooned in stasis pods that looked disturbingly like coffins. Mothers had kissed sleeping children one last time. Lovers had whispered promises into ears that would not hear them for centuries or never. The The chosen 41, command crew, engineers, pilots, medics, stood on the open gantry in flight leathers, faces pale, trying not to shake. Cale Drace walked the line slowly, touching each shoulder as he passed. When he reached Riley Quinn at the far end, the younger man offered a crooked grin that didn't quite hide the fear behind his eyes. "Permission to be terrified, sir?" "Granted," Cale said, "but save it for after we light the torch." Riley's grin steadied. At the foot of the gantry waited the official delegation. 8 guildmasters, the planetary archivist, and little Kalis Drace clutching her grandfather's old flight scarf like a banner. She had insisted on coming. No one had the heart to refuse her. Cale knelt, pressed his forehead to hers. "Keep the canyon warm," he whispered. "I will," she whispered back, fierce as any reactor smith. "Bring them the song." He stood, turned to the crowd, and raised one hand. 40,000 voices fell silent so completely that the wind itself seemed to pause. "We were taken," Cale said, and the plateau answered with the second line, "We endured." "One day we will return," he continued, "and pay the debt." 40,000 throats roared back, shaking dust from the gantry. Cale let the echo die, then spoke the final words alone. "Today is that day." He turned and climbed the gantry without looking back. If he had, he might never have left. Inside the ship, the corridors were already cold and smelling of new metal. The 41 took their stations in silence, stasis pods sealed with soft sighs behind them. Riley dropped into the co-pilot couch beside Cale, strapped in, and flexed his hands like a man about to wrestle a storm. On the main screen, the external view showed the plateau falling away as the gantry retracted. 40,000 faces became a single living carpet of hope and grief. Riley's voice was suddenly small. "They're really letting us go." "They're making us go," Cale answered. He keyed the ship wide. "All stations, this is actual, torch in 10. Lena's voice from engineering. Asha and Lyra at 98%. Magnetic bottles green. Tara from navigation. Course laid for Sol. Departure window opens in 41 seconds. Cale looked at Riley. Riley looked back, manic grin fully in place now. "Light it," Cale said. Riley reached up and slammed the master igniter the way another man might slap an old friend on the back. The plateau dropped away. 1.2 gravities pressed them into couches as blue-white fire, pure, terrible, beautiful, roared out of the twin nozzles and painted the canyon the color of newborn stars. The Astralis rose slowly at first, then faster, faster, until the gantry was a child's toy and Hearthspire a glowing coin, and cryonics itself began to curve beneath them. On the ground, 40,000 people fell to their knees as one organism. Some wept, some laughed. Some simply stared until their eyes burned. High above, already tasting vacuum, Rex's warm baritone filled every corridor for the first time. "We are officially homesick," the AI said, almost gently. "Next stop, family." Behind them, the twin suns rose together over a world that had kept its promise for 74,000 years. Ahead, the stars opened like a road made of fire. Section 7, The Long Burn, Day 47, Deep Interstellar Cruise. The habitat rings spun. Slow and steady, giving the illusion of gravity while the torch never blinked. Blue-white fire poured from Asha and Lyra in perfect silence, pushing the Astralis at a constant 1.2 gravities toward a yellow star still 2,473 light-years away. Inside the ring, the corridors smelled of greenhouse tomatoes, hot metal, and the faint ozone tang that always followed Lena Voss when she crawled out of a reactor crawlspace. Samantha Kane stood alone in the forward observation blister, boots mag-locked to the deck, watching the universe blue shift into a tunnel of violet fire. 45 years old, navigator by trade, she had spent the last 3 nights here instead of her bunk, mapping star lines that no human eye had ever seen in motion. Her reflection in the transparisteel looked older than 45. Behind her, the hatch cycled. Vera Aiken stepped through carrying 2 squeeze bulbs of something that steamed. "You'll rust if you stay here much longer, Sammy," Vera said, voice warm as fresh bread. 26, mess chief, scarred forearms from a childhood spent feeding refugees during a dust famine. She still treated food like sacrament. Samantha accepted the bulb without looking away from the tunnel. I keep thinking if I stare long enough, Sol will suddenly be there. Like blinking makes the distance shorter. Vera settled beside her, boots locking with a soft clank. 47 days, she said. We're already faster than any probe we ever launched. Rex says we'll be at turnover in another 90. Then the long break. They drank in silence. The liquid was bitter canyon root tea cut with something that tasted like hope. Vera broke the quiet first. I started the wall. She jerked her chin toward the corridor. Samantha finally turned. Half the mess hall bulkhead had become a living cave painting. Someone, probably Milo Chen, had etched the first line. A simple charcoal sketch of Ver Rift at dawn, twin suns rising over red cliffs. Beneath it, in careful block letters, Remember Canyon Wind. Below that, new lines had appeared every day. A child's handprint in greenhouse soil, a smear of reactor grease shaped like a torch plume, a pressed tomato leaf still green. Someone had added a crude drawing of Riley's manic grin. Someone else had written in flowing script, "Beer tastes better with gravity." Samantha felt her throat tighten. "Every crew member adds one line," Vera said softly. "No rules except truth. When we reach Sol, the whole wall will be full. Then we start a new one for the cousins." Samantha reached out and touched the bulkhead. The metal was warm from the ring's spin, warm from 41 human hands that refused to let homesickness calcify. "I'll add mine tonight," she whispered. Vera bumped her shoulder. "Good. And eat real food tomorrow. The tomatoes are perfect. I'll trade you a whole one for a star map." They stood together until the blue shift tunnel dimmed for the night cycle and the ship's lights lowered to canyon dusk amber. Somewhere aft, Riley was singing off-key flight cadences, while Lena cursed him for leaning on a console still hot from diagnostics. Somewhere forward, Kale walked the reactor gallery alone, checking readouts no one else would notice for another decade. The torch kept burning. 41 hearts kept beating in slow, stubborn rhythm, with a world they had left behind and a world they had not yet earned. On the mess hall wall, in fresh grease still wet, someone added 3 new words beneath the growing mural. "The spark endures." Section 8, First Sight of the Wound. Day 171, Deceleration toward Sol. The torch had been dark for 6 hours, and the silence felt like drowning. For half a year, the Astralis had roared forward on a column of fusion fire. Now, flipped 180 degrees, Asha and Lyra faced forward and bled velocity at 1.2 gravities, turning the stars from violet knives back into ordinary points of light. The habitat ring still spun, but every soul aboard was awake and strapped to stations. No one spoke unless the numbers demanded it. Kale Drace sat rigid in the command couch, eyes locked on the main screen. The yellow star ahead was no longer a target coordinate. It was Sol, bright and terrible, and close enough to hurt. At its side, a blue-white marble grew larger with every heartbeat. Earth. The planet filled half the screen when Taravex finally broke the silence. "Thermal bloom confirmed," she said, voice flat with the effort of staying calm. "Northern hemisphere under permanent ash cover. Mean surface temperature down 4.6 degrees from pre-industrial baseline. Albedo spike consistent with sulfate aerosols. Population signatures, 2.1 billion, clustered in equatorial arcologies and high plateaus. 2.1 billion. The number struck the bridge like a hammer on bone. Riley Quinn's usual grin was gone. He stared at the bruised continent sliding across the screen, North America unrecognizable, the Midwest a black scar, Yellowstone a crater lake of glass, and whispered the first thing that came to mind. They got hit again. Lena Voss stood behind him, grease still under her nails from last-minute torch tweaks. Her knuckles were white on the back of Riley's couch. "Not again," she said quietly. "Still, the impact was 36 years ago. They're still burning." The screen shifted to visible light. Europe was a lid of brown-gray haze that never lifted. Asia's night side showed only a handful of city glows, dim and desperate. Africa fared better, but even there the lights were sparse, huddled along the equator like refugees around a dying fire. Samantha Kane's voice came from navigation, thin and careful. "Incoming laser, Antique modulation, English language, New Geneva origin. She patched it through. A woman's voice, exhausted, speaking words that had once been every day and now sounded like prayer. This is New Geneva arcology. Earth. Unidentified torch plume, please respond. We say again, any station, this is Earth, we are cold. Static hissed across the centuries. Cale felt the weight of 74,000 years settle on his shoulders. He reached forward and opened all band, every frequency the Astralis carried, from crystal spark gap to quantum entanglement. This is Astralis Actual, Commander Cale Drace, he said, and his voice did not shake at all. We read you, New Geneva. We are family, and we brought the sun with us. For one heartbeat the bridge was utterly still. Then the speakers exploded. Voices poured in, thousands, millions, some in languages no one on cryonics had spoken for millennia, some in dialects that had evolved in isolation under ash. Children laughing, adults sobbing, someone playing a recorder, shaky but unmistakable, the three-note phrase. Riley let out a sound halfway between laugh and sob. They remember, he whispered. They actually remember. Cale kept the channel open and looked at the wounded world filling the screen. 2.1 billion souls still breathing because the Preservari had miscalculated by 0.1%. He leaned forward until his forehead almost touched the glass. We're here, he told the planet, voice raw. We're late, cousins, but we're here. Behind him, 40 awakened crew members stood in silence while Earth rose to meet them, ash-covered and defiant and impossibly, heartbreakingly alive. The torch had carried them across 2,520 light-years of night. Now the real burn began.